Good afternoon. This is Media Center, Ukraine, Odesa. This is our third briefing. And before this start, I'd like to remind that you can watch us both online or Facebook. You can also ask questions. Just scan the QR code that you can now see on the screen. Our speaker is Oleksandr Khara, expert of the Defense Strategy Center. He's online with us today. Good afternoon. I've just seen in the news that there is yet another event dedicated to the Ukraine-NATO cooperation. What decisions can we expect today? This is a very important event. But let's get back a bit. There was the Vilnius summit where the decision was not the one that we expected, although it was positive about the approximation of Ukraine to the NATO membership, avoiding the so-called action plan of the NATO membership. And if you remember, in 2008 at Bucharest summit, it was not allowed for Ukraine and Georgia to make such a step, and then it was followed by the Russian aggression against Georgia. But nowadays, because of the open war of Russia against Ukraine, the NATO gave us the specific signal saying that the process of actual integration will start. Today's meeting will be at the level of the Minister of Foreign Affairs, and this is the new format for the Ukraine-NATO cooperation. It was initiated at the Vilnius summit. That was the inauguration meeting with the involvement of the President of Ukraine, but that was more of a formal event having a political meaning. But at that meeting, it was not discussed what Ukraine should do to become a fully-fledged member of NATO. But today's meeting will be dedicated to these criteria that Ukraine should achieve, what Ukraine should do to become a NATO member state. And today, Ukraine's government will offer the adapted annual program, which is our Ukrainian response to not getting the action plan in 2008. So we just developed a document envisaging our commitments with regard to reforming the defense and security sector to meet NATO standards. So there is no formal action plan now. That's why the Ukrainian government decided to present the document with the key priorities that could be the key criteria that could be used to assess Ukraine in terms of Ukraine's progress for the possible membership of Ukraine. NATO membership for Ukraine means that we are ready on the one hand, but on the other hand, this is a political will of our partners for Ukraine to join NATO. There are 31 states there now, and we hope that in the nearest future, Hungary and Turkey will unblock the membership for Sweden, and we will have 32. And I believe that 33 is a good number for Ukraine to join NATO. And of course, the meeting will be discussed the current situation of the Russian aggression and what Ukraine can do to protect it and defend itself. NATO as organization is not involved in the support of Ukraine's struggle against the Russian Federation because our Western partners want to avoid the direct conflict with the Russian Federation and NATO's involvement in the conflict. But NATO member states bilaterally provide the main assistance and the main support that we have seen since in February last year. But in any way, NATO has a complex of programs to modernize our armed forces. So these are just paramilitary aspects of such support, but still they are very important, and not only for Ukraine to meet NATO standards to become a member state, but to be more effective in using the limited resources in this war, and also to just restrain the Russian aggression in the future. So this is about the conditions that Ukraine should meet to formally become closer to the NATO membership, but still we need to remember about a political will. So this is mainly about the United States and Germany, who still not sure that Ukraine should become a NATO member in the near future, because they do not want to provoke the direct conflict with the Russian Federation. Also, they understand that Ukraine is not still ready to become a NATO member because of by specific parameters. Before the full-scale invasion, membership in NATO looked more like a political step, and for quite a long time, NATO has not been involved in some conflicts, especially in those hostilities that we can now see in Ukraine. And the possible accession of Ukraine not to NATO in 2008 was more like a sign that Ukraine should work some path when it comes to the political agenda, but now it is more about safety and security. And please correct me, but I don't remember that NATO took a country as a member during active hostilities. This will be the first time for Ukraine. Yes, but on the other hand, you know that which is our territory is partially occupied. It is not recognized by the world. But in Germany's history, in 1955, the country became NATO member when one of its parts was so-called German Democratic Republic. Sometimes we can hear that Ukraine is not that democratic as it is needed for the membership, but we can see Hungary, and the EU has questions to Hungary because of the violation of the rule of law. And there are also signs that this is not a democratic state in full. So there are formal parameters or criteria which are traditional, and there are some factors that are not taken into consideration if there is a political will. Because, for example, Turkey and Greece became the NATO members, and these are antagonist states, and recently they were on the verge of the open confrontation. And of course, there is a question about democracy, rule of law, and freedom of speech in Turkey. But because of the strategic location of the state, it was invited to NATO. When it comes to Ukraine's situation, we are now in war with the biggest country in the European continent with the biggest army, and it is much bigger when it comes to resources than Ukraine. And of course, it is taken into consideration. But on the other hand, there are other issues. So, for example, if Ukraine still remains in the gray zone, if Ukraine is not allowed to access NATO, if Ukraine loses the war, then this means that the conflict will be with the NATO countries, and there will be escalation with possible nuclear weapon to be used. That's why Western countries support us, although they're not the part of the conflict. So there are the preconditions for Ukraine to access NATO as soon as possible. And just several weeks ago, we saw in mass media an idea that we somehow could reconcile with Russia. They will de facto control the part of your territory. You will not recognize this, but you will become a NATO member state, and then you'll have time for the development of your democracy, economy, and then through diplomacy, you will somehow settle with the Russian Federation your territorial issues. It was also told that Ukraine could be taken to the NATO through the quick procedure, but our Western countries don't have any quick procedure, and secondly, the decisions as for NATO membership are not that easy to be taken, and we can see the situation with Finland, and Sweden still cannot become a fully fledged NATO member because it is blocked by Turkey and Hungary. And of course, Ukraine cannot agree to be in Russia's concentration camp, and this will also allow to Russia become a stronger state and conquer other territories of Ukraine, and NATO membership will not be able just to help Ukraine in settling the conflict with Russia. And of course, we cannot just leave any of our territories to Russia. There could be no compromises. But we understand that Ukraine will not become a NATO member state until the war is over because of the concerns of our Western allies. But if there is a political will, especially in Washington, Ukraine's accession to NATO, there will be no sense for Russia to continue the war, because the precondition was that NATO threatened Russia, but that was bullshit. And because that was not about Ukraine's accession to NATO, but that meant for Russia that Russia could not destroy Ukrainian sovereignty. And so this is not the threat of the NATO that can somehow attack the Russian Federation. This is nonsense. But that would mean for Russia to lose the territories and for further expansion to destabilize situation in the European continent. Oleksandr, I have a question to you. I remember that over recent years, when there were some armed interventions and wide-scale massive operations, NATO was not involved in that. We can speak here about Iraq. If I'm not mistaken, that Afghanistan was not the case, because that was under the auspices of NATO. But after that, NATO has seen no big military operations. Iraq was without NATO. I'm not sure about Libya, but I think that that was the operation of some individual countries and not the NATO as a whole. After 2014, after Russian invasion and the occupation of Crimea and the part of Donbass, if I remember correctly, NATO did not support Ukraine like military. They were trust funds aimed at mental support, rehabilitation, sometimes for training, but that was not the military support. And now, after 2022, there was established the Ramstein format. There was support of some countries rendered to Ukraine, but not NATO in general. What could be the role of NATO if they are not ready just for our accession, and we are also not ready for the plan that was discussed by the former Secretary General of NATO as for the quick procedure if we just leave the conquered territories to Russia? What could be NATO's role in this situation? You are perfectly right, say when the Article 5 of the Washington Agreement about collective security was used after the terrorist attack on the United States. And the base of those terrorists was de facto Afghanistan. That was the only case when NATO launched the mechanism. In other cases, after the collapse of the USSR, and quite often Russia speaks about Yugoslavia, but that was one of the high levels. That was the NATO countries, and not only NATO countries, who were ready to be involved in a campaign to support their allies to solve some issues. When it comes to Yugoslavia, there were ethnic purges that reached the level that it was difficult to tolerate them in Europe because the civilian war on the territory of former Yugoslavia it took like several years. And there is also the question of nuclear weapon. Milosevic did not have nuclear weapons, but Putin has it. Yes, it's clear, but let's just look at this from the bird's eye view, how Ukraine can ensure its security. The Russian Federation, the biggest nuclear state, and it's the same number of the nuclear carriers and projectiles, and they also use Kinzhals. They have the ground troops and also the nuclear submarines. But when it comes about tactical nuclear weapons, they have it more than the United States. So the United States and Russia are 80% of nuclear weapons on the planet, and we should remember about this factor. And we remember that in Russia they say that women can give birth to 140 million more, and of course, without 35 million, we cannot constrain Russia. We have several options for ensuring our security, our defense. This is the NATO membership because they are the member states like the UK that have their own nuclear weapon, and of course the United States. And also there is a mechanism of expanded security when the United States and their allies ensure nuclear constraint of their own means or American means on the territory of the European continent. There are 5 countries having American bombs, and if there is a conflict with the Russian Federation, they will be used by national forces under the auspices of NATO. So this nuclear umbrella is very important to constrain such big aggressors as the Russian Federation. There is one more option for Ukraine to sign the security agreement, not as it is with Israel, but as it is with Japan or the South Korea. And there are 25,000 American soldiers in the South Korea, and if there is the conflict between North and South Korea, or if China attacks Taiwan, the United States will be involved to support their allies, and this is the real defense guarantee. And our government keeps talking about the security guarantees that can be provided by our partners, and this is really bad that they use this term because this could hurt us in the future. They are the guarantee of the security aid. Everything is right, but the name deceives, and we have the parallel with Budapest Memorandum. When we gave up our nuclear weapons, the document was signed, and so in Ukrainian copy there was the security guarantee, but in English that was assurance of the security, and that's why it is a document that memorandum compared, for example, to bilateral agreements. When it comes to the tools, this is the membership in NATO, this is the agreement with the United States, the country that has the conventional nuclear weapons, and also the possibility to support us with weapons that can constrain the Russian Federation in the future, but this is not discussed at the moment. And our citizens say that we should get back our nuclear weapons. This is not the option. Taken into consideration the difference of the potential, for example, compared to what is owned by the Russian Federation, and we cannot deal with this with 5 or 10 ammunitions. We still need to try it. We need the air defense systems. Things that we're supported now, but this cannot cover the whole of our state, so this is not the option for us. And let alone that the United States will be the first to introduce sanctions to put pressure on Ukraine not to have nuclear weapons. That was in the 1990s. When it comes to the position of Western countries and the NATO in general about the conflict, it is really simple. This is the armed aggression of the Russian Federation against Ukraine is pursuant to the international law, and our allies they respect our efforts to protect themselves according to Article 51 of the UN. They support us with weapons and money, but they are not the part of the conflict. That's why the NATO does not provide us directly weapons. They provide us advisory support and other types of support for us to protect ourselves and also to become in the future the NATO member states. And we have an important tool that can transform us in the future. And also there is Ramstein format and other formats where we can discuss the real aspects of our defense, what weapons we need, what can be done together in terms of the production for Ukraine to do something about the war. You just made two examples, Japan and the South of Korea, the Republic of Korea. In the South of Korea, there were the troops under the umbrella of the Security Council of the UN. That was before China joined this Security Council of the UN. And these two regimes, democratic regimes, they were supported by the United States, exclusively by the United States. There were military bases. These bases are still there. That was support only by one state. And when it comes about the contemporary political landscape, is these scenarios possible in Ukraine? This is a very complicated topic, especially taking into consideration the tectonic changes in the geostrategy, geopolicy. This is the development of Asian countries and primarily China. And also the demography is not with the United States and their allies. India is the biggest democratic state in the world, 1.4 billion people in population, but they have their game of like not joining. That was during the Cold War. Of course, it tends to support the United States more, and it will be in the future, but they need time not to be dependent on Russian weapons anymore, like such jets as Su and Minsk and tanks T-90 and some other types of tanks and variations. And even when it comes to the nuclear triad, when it comes to nuclear or atomic submarine, the Soviet first and then Russian technologies. And such dependence does not allow India just to join another camp. And there is this threat from Pakistan, and we can see periodic conflicts there, and also from China, because China also threats some Indian territories, and let alone that behavior of China in the South Chinese Sea, trying to become a hegemon in there. And this is the region that has have its influence on the economy. And when it comes to the United States, it is not that powerful as it was during the Cold War, when they could make unilateral decisions. Now the U.S. needs allies just to deal with the burden Biden. So the United States will still be a powerful state, but when it comes to the possibility of solving like problems in any part of the world, this will not be the case in the world. We can see the domestic problems of the United States, especially when it comes to the Republican Party. There are a lot of illusion is there, and they say that constraining China is their task, but Ukraine does not need that support. This is the problem of Europe, because Russia is not that big threat for the United States. So the political elites see the limited role of the United States in the world. They don't want the United States to spend their own resources just to have that position of superpower in the world. And this is a big problem for us, just to try to persuade populists, because those who have a traditional approach to strategy, who understands the importance of Europe for the United States, which this is the biggest ally in terms of military activities, ideology, and also the possibility of support the United States and other regions in the Middle East, and also in India and China region, just to restrain, to stop China from attacking Taiwan. If we can persuade those populists, and I'm not sure in this, I just hope that the next year in November they don't just vote for people who say that they can be friends with Russia and that Ukraine is not that important. Ramaslavia, for example, says that I could just talk to Putin, saying that we can freeze the conflict in Ukraine and the occupied territories will be under Russia. But on the other hand, you should not be the ally of China. We've had one policymaker saying that it is enough to talk with Putin and the war will be over. Then this politician was elected to an important position, and now he has a different point of view on this issue. And the last question: why do you more informed than other? You are more informed about the situation. What do you expect of the today's event, of this NATO-Ukraine event and meeting? And so perhaps it could be like the question discussed about projectiles, ammunition, and Kuleb, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, what we could expect of him in terms of announcement after today. I don't expect any just significant announcements because when the discussion started in the United States and the problem with the speaker there of the representative chamber, Biden called to the European allies, asking them to help to fill in the gaps in the aid rendered to Ukraine, because the United States was running out of money that was allocated by the Congress before. And the next date, the UK just provided 500 million pounds of the military support to Ukraine. So this story will continue. And the same could be told about the manufacturing of projectiles. I hoped that we will get a signal, because the Europeans failed to meet their commitments, and this is really painful for us. For us, this is an existential war. We understand that if Russia wins, so we will have some terrible skins, which will be like multiplied Holodomors, and our nation will be destroyed, and the state will be destroyed. And most Western partners understand the necessity to support Ukraine, but they don't feel that if we lose the next day, Russia will have tanks in Europe, in Berlin, and we can see now changes in Germany. There is a progress. They also increase the military support of Ukraine. But when it comes to strengthening manufacturing capacity to help us now and to help them in the future, because after the collapse of the USSR in 1991, we can see some relaxation in the Western countries. They don't spend all their budgets for defense, and they have been facing the crisis after the COVID pandemic, and they are not ready to allocate funds for military manufacturing. So that's why I don't expect some big announcements today. Today's meeting is just a framework for us and for our future actions, and the framework for the assessment of our programs by other countries. So this will be some abstract criteria, but still there will be criteria when it comes to the democratic and civilian control all over defense and security sector. It is very important when it comes to secrecy and to avoid corruption, ineffective management when actually the military makes a decision that contradict the civilian leadership. This is impossible in European countries, and we should create tools to make it impossible. But over the last decade, our military has shown no signs of trying to violate the balance between the military and the civil authorities. Logistics is another issue. And of course, we have some developments in the Ministry of Defense, but there is still room for the improvement. There are other specific issues that are not directly related to combat elements, but without them, soldiers will not be that efficient. They are going to adopt today the adjusted national annual program, and it is very important for us to have any evidence supporting and proving our reforms and demonstrating that we are becoming closer to NATO. And this tool is very important, even to be able to persuade our partners at the political level, not to have this carrot and donkey situation. So we can just have criteria to prove our success. Thank you, Oleksandr, for your analysis, and we are looking forward for the decisions made at the forum, and we can see now messages in mass media which are not that optimistic, and that F-16 jets cannot change the situation at the front line, that Ukraine should get ready to the long war. So this is not optimistic, but on the other hand, this illustrates the level of understanding of NATO officials of the situation here in Ukraine. Thank you, Oleksandr. We'll keep in touch. Thank you for the invitation. Have a nice day. That was the last briefing at the Media Center Ukraine Odesa for today. Just follow our announcements, and we'll meet with you tomorrow.